Morning I drove back to my farmhouse in Hendersonville. I had nothing more in my mind than a pot of coffee and the sound of the wind coming through the hills. It was the Thursday before Thanksgiving, the kind of November morning where the sky sits low and pale over the ridge, and the smell of wood smoke already hangs in the air before you even roll down the window. I had spent 3 days in Asheville helping my friend Lorinda recover from hip surgery, cooking, sorting her medications, driving her to a follow-up appointment, and I was tired in the good, quiet way you get tired when you've been useful. I looked forward to my own bed, my own kitchen, the particular creak of the third porch step that I'd been meaning to fix for 4 years and probably never would. I turned off the main road onto the gravel path that cuts through the tree line, and that's when I saw them. 4 vehicles I didn't recognize, pulled up across the yard like they owned it. A white SUV with one tire half buried in the flower bed along the fence, a pickup truck with the tailgate down, a cooler sitting in the bed, and plastic bags from a grocery store I'd never shopped at scattered around it. The lights were on inside. Every light, the way people leave them when they've forgotten the electricity isn't theirs. I sat in my car for a moment with the engine running. The farmhouse had been my husband Harold's idea first, back when we were both still young enough to think we'd fill it with children and noise and years of holidays. We did fill it for a while, with our son and with Christmases and with the smell of bread and the particular happiness of a place that's actually yours. Harold died 11 years ago, a stroke, fast, the way some merciful things are fast. And after that, the farmhouse became something else. Still mine, still ours in the way a place stays ours even when half of us is gone. I'd kept every acre of it, maintained the fence lines, rented the backfield to a neighbor for hay, replanted the apple trees in the corner of the yard that Harold's father had started decades before. This house was not a thing that had happened to me. It was something I had built and held and chosen over and over again for 31 years. I got out of the car. My daughter-in-law appeared in the doorway before I'd even reached the porch steps. She was wearing one of the flannel shirts I kept on the hook by the back door, the red one, the one I put on when I go out to check on things in the cold. And she had it unbuttoned over a sweatshirt, sleeves pushed up, like she'd been cooking in it. Her hair was pulled back and she looked at me with an expression I'd seen on her face before, usually when I said something she hadn't asked for. "What are you doing here?" she said. It wasn't a question. I could hear voices inside, a man's laugh, the television on too loud in the back room. "I live here," I said. She stepped forward, pulling the door closer behind her as if that would help. "We needed somewhere for Thanksgiving. Alton said it would be fine." I looked past her through the narrow gap in the doorway. A woman I didn't know was moving around in my kitchen. There were pots on the stove and grocery bags on the counter and children's shoes on the floor by the table, which I had refinished myself 3 summers ago, sanding it down to bare wood on a hot August afternoon because Harold always said it was the best piece of furniture we owned, and I agreed with him. "Alton," I said, "doesn't own this house." Her chin lifted. Well, he said it was fine, so. She said the last word the way people say it when they've decided the conversation is over. I did not raise my voice. I want to say that now because I know what I felt in my chest at that moment, and it was not small. It was the kind of anger that comes from something deeper than the immediate thing. From watching a person stand in your doorway wearing your shirt and speaking to you like you're an inconvenience they hadn't planned for. But I have been 64 years old for several months now, and one of the things that comes with that, if you've been paying attention, is knowing which moments call for heat and which ones call for cold. "Tell Alton I'd like to speak with him," I said. She didn't move. "He's busy." "I'll wait." I sat down in the wicker chair at the end of the porch. I bought that chair at an estate sale in Flat Rock 12 years ago and carried it to the car myself because the man running the sale kept assuming I couldn't manage it. I set my purse on my knees and I waited. My son came out 7 minutes later. I counted because counting was something to do. Alton is 41. He has his father's build and his father's way of standing when he's uncomfortable, which is with his hands in his pockets and his eyes slightly to the side. He had that look now. He sat down on the porch railing instead of in the other chair, which would have meant sitting level with me and looking at me directly. "Mom," he started. "When did you decide this?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "A few weeks ago. Petra's whole family was coming in and they needed a place, and I figured you wouldn't mind. You were going to be in Asheville." "You figured," I said. "I was going to call." "You were going to call?" I let that sit for a second. "This is my home, Alton. You don't figure about someone else's home. You ask." Petra had reappeared in the doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching us with an expression that wasn't quite a smile. "It's just a few days," she said, from the door. I looked at my son. He looked at the railing. I stood up. I picked up my purse. "I need to get a few things from inside." Petra didn't move immediately, and we had a moment there on the porch steps where she seemed to be deciding whether she would, and I let her have the moment, and then she stepped aside. The house smelled like other people, like a particular brand of air freshener I didn't own and hadn't bought. Too sweet, the kind that's supposed to smell like clean laundry but doesn't. There were cups on the coffee table I'd never seen before and throw blankets I didn't recognize piled on the sofa. A child's backpack sat open on the armchair by the window, its contents spilling onto the cushion Harold always sat in. I walked through the living room without stopping. I climbed the stairs. My bedroom door was closed. I opened it. The room had been taken over so completely that for a moment I simply stood in the doorway trying to understand what I was seeing. The bed was made with different sheets with a pattern of gray chevrons that were not mine. My own bedding, the quilt I'd pieced together over 2 winters, ivory and pale blue, from fabric I'd collected for years, was folded roughly on the floor in the corner, like it had been set aside instead of stored, like it was something to deal with later. My nightstand had been cleared. The photograph of Harold that I keep there, the one from the year before he died, where we're standing in front of the apple trees in October, was face down on the dresser. Not put away. Just turned over. I stood very still. I turned it right side up. Then I opened the closet. My clothes were pushed to one end, shoved without ceremony. The other end held unfamiliar coats and bags. And on the shelf above, where I keep a fireproof document box, not hidden, but not advertised either, sitting behind a stack of folded sweaters. The sweaters had been moved. Not neatly. They were in a jumble, and the box was shifted forward as if someone had been looking behind it. I pulled the box down, locked, the way I always leave it. But beside it, on the shelf, there was a piece of paper, a printout. I unfolded it. It was from a website, a real estate attorney's office in Asheville. A summary of something called a quitclaim deed transfer, with a paragraph highlighted in yellow marker. The highlighted section explained that such a transfer, signed voluntarily, conveyed all ownership interest from one party to another and required only a notary, not a lawyer or a court. There was a handwritten note in the margin. The writing wasn't Alton's. It was Petra's. I'd seen her handwriting on birthday cards, on the notes she sometimes sent with the children when they visited. The note said, "Need to talk to him about signing before the new year. Easier if she doesn't know until after." I read it twice. Then I folded the paper carefully and put it in my purse. My hands were steady. I want to note that specifically because I was surprised by it. Surprised by how cleanly and quietly my body understood that this was not the moment to shake. I took what I'd come for, my blood pressure medication from the bathroom cabinet, a change of clothes, the photograph of Harold. I came back down the stairs at the same pace I'd gone up. Alton was in the living room. Petra was in the kitchen. There were 3 adults I'd never been introduced to sitting in various places around the room, and they all looked at me with the particular careful attention of people who know there is a situation and are pretending not to. "I'll be back in a few days," I said to Alton. "We'll talk then." He looked relieved, which told me everything I needed to know about what he'd been expecting. I drove away. The gravel crunched under my tires, and then I was on the pavement, and then I was on the main road, and I pulled into the parking lot of a church about a mile away and sat for a few minutes with the engine off. I am not a person who cries easily in cars. I did not cry, but I sat there long enough to let the stillness settle into something I could use. The motel I found was on the edge of town, a small place I'd driven past 100 times without ever going in. The room had everything I needed, which was a bed, a desk lamp, a working outlet, and quiet. I sat at the small table by the window and I opened my purse and I spread out what I had, the printout with Petra's note and my phone, and the clear understanding that I was not dealing with someone who had made a thoughtless mistake. This was a plan. I knew what a quitclaim deed was. Harold and I had dealt with one when his mother passed and there was a question about a piece of property she'd owned in Georgia. It's one of the simplest legal instruments there is, which is also why it's one of the most misused. You could transfer a house with one, if the owner signed. All you needed was the right moment, the right pressure, and someone who hadn't been warned. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Her name is Donna, and she's been handling my affairs for 15 years. I got her voicemail and left a message that was calm and specific. I said I believed someone was planning to ask me to sign over my property and that I needed to speak with her in the morning. Then I called Harlan. Harlan has lived across the road from me for 22 years. He was a county surveyor for 30 years before he retired, and he has a particular quality that I have always found valuable in a neighbor. He pays attention. He told me he'd noticed the cars earlier in the week, assumed Alton had mentioned the farmhouse to family, hadn't thought much of it. I asked if he'd seen anyone going in and out of the barn. He had, 2 men, one afternoon. I thanked him and asked if he'd keep an eye on things while I sorted out some business. He said, of course, and asked if I needed anything. I told him not yet. I sat at the desk and wrote out everything I remembered, the date and time I arrived, what I'd seen in each room, the exact wording of Petra's note, the 2 vehicles I hadn't gotten plate numbers for that I described as best I could. I'm a retired school librarian. I know how to document things. Sources, details, dates. I filled 3 pages. In the morning, I drove to Donna's office. She listened to everything without interrupting. She has that quality which I appreciate because many people who are very good at their work feel the need to show it by talking. Donna shows it by listening. When I finished, she asked me 2 questions, then looked at the printout for a long time. She didn't find the box, she said. No. But she was looking. Yes. Donna put the paper down. She folded her hands. This doesn't rise to the level of fraud yet because they haven't acted on it. But it tells us what they're thinking, and we're going to get ahead of it. She outlined what she could do and what I should do. The order of operations. The way you stop a thing like this before it starts. The first step was the deed. Donna filed a notice with the Henderson County Register of Deeds that same day, a formal memorandum establishing that I was the sole owner of the property, that no transfer was authorized, and that any instrument purporting to convey my interest should be flagged for verification. It wasn't complicated. It was the legal equivalent of a lock on the door. The second step was documentation. I had already begun this, but Donna had a paralegal help me organize everything into a coherent record. The photographs I'd taken of the bedroom, the printout with the handwritten note, my written account of the timeline, everything dated, everything stored. The third step was Alton. I gave it 3 days. I stayed at the motel. I visited Lorinda again. I slept better than I expected. On the 3rd morning, I called my son and asked him to meet me for coffee at a diner in town, alone. He agreed without much pushback, which surprised me. And then I realized it probably shouldn't have. He knew something was coming. He'd known it since the porch. We sat in a booth at the back. He ordered coffee. I ordered coffee. We were quiet for a moment in the way you're quiet when you've been close to someone for a long time and the thing between you is too large for small talk. Tell me what you knew, I said. He looked at his cup. Petra said she'd found someone who could help with the estate planning, that it might make more sense for the property to transfer to us while you're still alive, avoid probate, simplify things. Did she mention asking me? A pause. She said she was going to talk to you about it. After Thanksgiving, I said. That was the plan. He looked up. I put the printout on the table between us. I'd brought a copy. The original was in Donna's files. He read it. He read it again. His face did several things in the space of about 30 seconds, and none of them were things I'd seen on his face before. I didn't know about this, he said. I believed him. I want to be honest about that. I sat in that diner and I looked at my son and I believed that he hadn't seen that specific note, hadn't known the plan had been written down that way, hadn't understood the full shape of what Petra had been building. That belief did not make me feel better. It made me feel something more complicated, something that took me several days to find the word for. The word was grief. Because Alton had known something was being arranged. He'd opened the farmhouse without asking. He'd been willing to let a process begin that would end with me signing something I hadn't been prepared for. He hadn't known the details, but he'd been standing close enough to the edge that the details almost hadn't mattered. I've spoken to Donna, I said. The property is protected. No transfer will go through without multiple layers of verification, and I've documented everything from this week. I picked up my coffee. I love you. That hasn't changed. But I need you to understand that this is my home. It will remain my home for as long as I am alive and choosing to live in it. And when I am ready to make decisions about what happens to it after me, I will make them. Not Petra. Not you. Me. He didn't say anything for a long time. She's going to be angry, he finally said. I imagine she will be. He drove back to the farmhouse that afternoon and they were gone by evening. Harlan texted me a photo of the empty driveway. No comment, just the image. I looked at it for a while and then I drove home. The house took a few days to put right. There was a broken cabinet hinge in the kitchen that hadn't been there before, a stain on the living room rug, a crack in the glass of the back door that I suspected but couldn't prove. I documented all of it and sent the list to Donna, who added it to the file. Some of the damage I fixed myself. Some I hired a man from church to fix. I replaced the flannel shirt. I found it in the laundry room, unwashed. I threw it away. The flower bed along the fence where the SUV tire had been took more work. I dug out what was left of the asters and turned the soil and added compost, and I planted bulbs there in the cold November ground because I am the kind of person who plants bulbs in November, who plants things in the knowledge that she will be here in April when they come up. Harlan came over one afternoon and helped me patch a section of the fence the truck had scraped pulling out. We drank coffee on the porch afterward. He didn't ask questions and I didn't explain, and we sat there looking at the ridge the way you look at something you've been looking at for decades and still find worth looking at. Alton called me 2 weeks later. Petra did not call. I didn't expect her to. My son's call was short and not easy for either of us. He said he was sorry. He said he should have asked before inviting anyone, said he should have asked a lot of things. He didn't say much about Petra. I didn't press. The relationship between a person and their marriage is their own, and I was not going to be the reason that particular thread unraveled if I could help it. What I said was that I hoped he understood the difference between being involved in something and being responsible for it, and that going forward I expected him to be clear on which one he was choosing in any situation involving me or anything that was mine. He said he understood. I don't know yet if that's true. I suppose I'll find out over time in the way you find out everything important. Slowly, in small moments, in whether or not the thing you hoped for turns out to be the thing that was actually there. The farmhouse is quieter now. The holidays came and went, and I drove to my sister's in Knoxville for Thanksgiving and ate too much and slept in her spare room and drove back the next day to my own house, my own ridge, my own creek in the third porch step. On Christmas morning, I lit a fire and made coffee and sat in the chair by the window and read for 3 hours without speaking to anyone. And it was one of the better mornings I can remember having. Harold's photo is back on the nightstand where it belongs. The apple trees in the corner of the yard have gone bare for winter, their branches stripped down to the clean lines underneath. In the spring, they'll do what they always do, which is come back. I have learned, and this is not a small thing, I want to say it plainly, that a quiet response is not the same as a weak one. That keeping your voice level when your chest is burning is not retreat. It is patience with a purpose. Every person who has ever tried to take something from a woman they assumed wouldn't fight has made the same mistake. They confused silence for surrender. I am 64 years old. I have buried a husband and raised a son and built a life on 31 acres of North Carolina hill country with my own hands and my own choices. I know the difference between a door that's been closed and a door that's been locked. Mine is locked now, and I know exactly where I keep the key. I think about the moment I stood in my own bedroom doorway and saw my quilt folded on the floor like something to be dealt with later. That image stayed with me longer than anything else from that week. Not Petra's face. Not what she said at the door. The quilt on the floor. Because it was the clearest picture of what someone had decided about me without ever saying it out loud. What I've come to understand is that what happened wasn't really about the house. It was about whether I would see what was being arranged and do nothing. Whether I was the kind of woman who could be managed quietly, presented with a piece of paper at the right moment in the right setting. After enough time had passed for resistance to feel awkward, people who plan things like that are counting on something specific, that the person on the other end will be too tired, or too eager to keep the peace, or too afraid of being called difficult to push back. I was none of those things. Not because I'm exceptional, but because I paid attention. That's the first thing I'd want anyone to take from this. Not courage in the dramatic sense. Not the kind that announces itself. The quieter kind. The kind that keeps you writing things down in a motel room at 10 o'clock at night when your hands want to shake. The kind that calls the attorney in the morning and speaks clearly and doesn't apologize for taking up the space. That's what carried me through. Not rage, not a scene on the porch, but the willingness to stay clear-eyed when someone was counting on me to be clouded by hurt. The second thing is harder to say. Alton knew something was being arranged. He hadn't seen Petra's note, hadn't known the full shape of it, but he had opened my home without asking and called it a favor. That tells you something about what a person has allowed themselves to believe is acceptable. The consequence of that wasn't punishment I handed him. It was the natural result of the choice he'd already made. He lost something that week that I'm not sure he fully understands yet. Not the house. Trust takes longer to rebuild than a fence line, and it doesn't happen because someone says they're sorry. It happens in small moments, over time, when the words and the actions finally match. What I want for him, what I genuinely want, is that he becomes the kind of man his father was. Harold never would have stood silent, not because he was loud, but because he understood that the people you love are not a resource. They are not something to be managed for someone else's convenience. That understanding is not something you're born with. It's something you build, the same way you build anything worth having, slowly, with attention, with honesty about when you've gotten it wrong. The farmhouse is quiet now. The bulbs I planted in November will come up in April whether or not anyone is watching. That's the thing about roots. They don't ask permission. They just do what they were built to do, which is hold. I am 64 years old and I know who I am. That knowledge is not arrogance. It is the result of 31 years of choosing, again and again, to build something real. No one gets to hand that back to them in a folded piece of paper. Not while I'm still here to say otherwise.